to imagine how thrilled I am that Claire Martin is the candidate here in North Vancouver. Also extremely proud that Ken Melemed, whom I've known since he was mayor of Whistler, that's when I first met him when he was the mayor of Whistler, is running in West Vancouver Sunshine Coast Sea to Sky Country. It hasn't been, I don't think, well enough acknowledged across Canada that the Green Party has assembled a more impressive group of new candidates who've never been in politics before than any of the other parties. Had people like Gord Miller, who is our candidate in Guelph, run for another party. I think you would have all heard about it by now. He was for 14 years the Environmental Commissioner for the province of Ontario, served under 4 different premiers, maintained a watchdog role in a nonpartisan and reliable fashion for a very long time, considering he was initially appointed by Mike Harris. I mean, Gord Miller running in Guelph, Claire Martin running in North Van. We have news just today, which will delight you.
Yes. Yeah.
Deborah Coyne, who was at one time a well-known Liberal, is the Green Party candidate in Carleton, where the sitting MP is Pierre Poilievre. Whom you may know from having listened to All Points West from Victoria for 10 years. She was the host there. People like Paul Manley, who's extremely well-known filmmaker, is running in Nanaimo Ladysmith. His dad, Jim Manley, had been the Member of Parliament for that riding for some time. So we have, I could go on, and in Quebec, extraordinary candidates, extremely well-known within Quebec. We have a very impressive group of Canadians who are standing up to run for the Green Party in this election. It does me enormous honor to have this assembly of talent and people who could have run for any party. In fact, people who were asked to run by many of the other parties and chose to run as Green Party candidates to serve as Green Party members of Parliament. Now, what I've done as a Green Party member of Parliament has been to use this mechanism of the town hall meeting as a way to report into my bosses. I was really clear about it when I was running for Parliament 4 years ago, that it's a very easy thing to promise when you mean it, is that you'll never make a promise you can't keep. And that meant that I could promise those things over which I knew I had total control. So I promised my constituents that I would never heckle. I promised my constituents that all of my expenses to the Government of Canada would be made public, and I'd scan them and put them on my website, so I became the first MP to ever do that. I promised my members of Parliament, I promised my constituents that I would work for them, that my goal was to be the best member of Parliament they would ever have had, and that I would find ways to find out what was on their minds in between elections, which I did in a couple of ways. One was to have my newsletters focus on substantive content and not empty blather about me cutting ribbons or being somewhere else. I'm really proud of the set of householders that we developed over the last 4 years, because they took on issues that don't get enough attention in the mainstream media. I had one entire householder to constituents to describe what an investor-state agreement is, why we were trying to stop the Canada-China investment treaty, and then I did a similar one on healthcare and seniors issues, and one on housing. And we provided in the newsletter, which went to every household, the opportunity to fill out a form to tell me, do you agree? Are there other issues on your mind? What are your concerns? We had tremendous feedback from these. And I also held, in not my ridings geographically, the spread is much bigger than North Van, but I held in my riding in 9 different locations twice every year a town hall meeting for me to report back to my constituents in a nonpartisan way what had just been happening in Parliament, and take the first 20 minutes of the meeting to describe what happened in Parliament in the last session, and then open the floor to questions, which often ran for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. The last round of full town halls that I did an abbreviated group at the end of June, when I realized I couldn't do my town halls after Labor Day when I usually do them because of the election, that I thought would be called in early September.
Yeah.
But I did my last full round of town hall meetings in January. In 9 meetings, 1,500 people showed up. So it's a really interesting thing, and as they became predictable, I thought that the interest might drop off, but the opposite happened. More people came all the time. So if it was a town hall meeting in Saanich Gulf Islands, the rounds of things that I reported on in my last sessions in my riding were the things that occurred between January of 2015 and when the House rose at the end of June. And I can run through some of those very quickly for you if it reminds you of what's going on in Parliament, you want to ask questions. And then I want to wrap up before I open the floor about developments to let you know what I think is going on in terms of an election. But between January and June of 2015, I thought I'd seen the worst legislation possible from Stephen Harper when I was the first member of Parliament and possibly the only member of Parliament to read Bill C-38, the omnibus budget bill in spring 2012. I mean, that was 440 pages of changes to 70 different bills, repealing some. I'm sure a lot of you remember C-38, destroying the fisheries habitat protection, repealing the Environmental Assessment Act, a devastating piece of legislation. But C-51 is the most dangerous thing I've ever seen in a democracy. And it was tabled, so thinking about things chronologically from when Parliament resumed to when we adjourned, that was the first thing of note that occurred. The bill was tabled relatively quietly in Parliament for first reading. The show was put on elsewhere, where Stephen Harper held a campaign-style rally in Richmond Hill, Ontario, to announce Bill C-51, the so-called Anti-Terrorism Act, which is in some ways impossible legislation, impossible in that it torpedoes the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, while at the same time making it harder for security agencies to abort terrorist plots. It accomplishes neither the goal that is announced, nor is it justifiable when you consider how much of our basic freedoms and liberties are trampled. But that bill was tabled, as I said, January 30th. The campaign-style rally was in Richmond Hill, Ontario, to fervent Conservative supporters, and Stephen Harper announced that, in his words, quote, "Violent jihadism is not a human right. It is an act of war." This is the kind of rhetoric you get to instill in people such panic and fear that they won't read the legislation. No one has ever suggested that violence of any kind is human right. No one has ever suggested that violent jihadism is a human right. But on the other hand, neither is it an act of war. War is a very clearly understood concept of declaring war between nation states. Any form of violence is criminal activity, and it has to be dealt with appropriately by security forces, by working with our allies. I could go on and on about all this. But on January 30th, I started reading Bill C-51. It was a Friday. As luck would have it, the following Monday, February 2nd, I had my one question of the week in question period. And I remember with a sort of a sense of disbelief, I thought, by the time they get to me in question period, because I'm always at the end of the question period session, I thought, my good question may have been taken by Mulcair already, or maybe by Trudeau, or maybe by somebody else. Because I never, I don't write out a question or rehearse it. But certainly, unlike everybody else in question period, I'm not handed a question to be written by someone else to read it, nor am I handed, the Conservatives are handed the answers to read. No, seriously, it's bizarre. I could go on at length about this, but I won't. I can mix it up. I can change. So if the question I intended to ask is asked by someone else, I can either change topics or change my question. But I was pretty sure that since the editorial in the Globe and Mail that day had described C-51 as the Secret Police Act, that by the time they got to me, the bill would have already been attacked by everybody else as the Secret Police Act. Well, as it turned out, Mr. Mulcair criticized Mr. Harper for not having adequately funded security forces and wondered where the oversight in the bill was. Trudeau's question was almost identical. And when I rose and said my question is about the Secret Police Act, the roar of booing from the Conservatives was so loud that I followed something else I promised my constituents I would do, which is that I would neither heckle nor would I continue to try to ask a question over the noise. So I do what I always do when I'm being loudly heckled. I took my seat again and waited for the speaker. And of course the speaker said, "Order, order." He stood. When I sit, it's almost like an invisible line exists between us. I sit, he stands. And says, "Order. The member for Saanich Gulf Islands has the floor." So then I got to ask again. My question is about the Secret Police Act. They went a little crazy, but not as loudly. It was 17 days later the NDP came out against C-51. I don't hold it against them that it took them a while, but it is the case that I have fought it really hard. The Green amendments to C-51 put forward by Green Party colleague from Thunder Bay, Superior North, Bruce Heyer, and I put forward more amendments to the bill than the NDP and the Liberals combined. None of us got our amendments approved, by the way, but one of my amendments was partially converted into a government amendment, The issue I started raising, actually the issue of my question on February 2nd, whether this was going to criminalize nonviolent civil disobedience because of the way the bill was drafted, they actually changed that section based on the criticisms I've raised. But there was nothing else about the bill makes it acceptable. And of course, it is now law. If you want to ask me more, I'd be delighted, because it's a very dangerous piece of legislation, and understanding why it is actually going to make us less able to abort a terrorist plot. That's a key thing that hasn't come through in the media. We also had an omnibus budget bill this spring. Of course, why not? We had a late budget because the Minister of Finance said he needed more time to accommodate himself to plummeting oil prices. This irony wasn't lost on the media, that somehow the province of Alberta got its budget out on time, where one would assume the impact was more profound. We did have another omnibus budget bill following the April 21st budget. And we also had a vote not on a bill, but on the extension of the bombing mission, taking it from not just Iraq for 6 months, but Iraq and Syria for a further year. I introduced 2 private members' bills this spring. One calls on all science performed and funded with public money to be, as a matter of law, placed publicly on websites after publication, so there could no longer be the muzzling of scientists. And I also brought forward a private member's bill to call for advanced impact assessment of any government legislation or changes to our fiscal framework that affect small business. So it's a Small Business Impact Assessment Act. I hope to get it through after the election. I also, right before the House rose for the summer, I managed to get the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission tabled before Parliament, and Bruce Heyer managed to get through an entire bill for Lake Superior National Marine Conservation Area. There were, of course, there was a lot of other legislation going through the House at the same time. The most bizarre of which people didn't read about this much in the paper. They've now passed a bill called Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act. It's a bumper sticker in search of a public policy problem. The bill makes things illegal that are already illegal. This bill, and you'd sit there in Parliament and hear Conservative MPs railing against barbaric cultural practices, and surely the members of the opposition will stand with us against barbaric cultural practices like honor killings. Why do the opposition members not care about women's rights? I'm not kidding you. This is William. Will the Honourable Minister concede that, in fact, killing anyone's been illegal in Canada for quite some time? We are not a land awash in a lawless land where women who marry outside the faith are open season for murder, because actually murder's been illegal a really long time, kind of since Moses got the tablets. It's not been considered on. The other thing they're going to make, it's barbaric cultural practice that there are forced polygamous marriages in this country. Okay, A, polygamy, illegal. B, kidnapping anyone to do anything they don't want to do, illegal. This entire bill is about things that are already illegal. But the railing about it, so there were other bills in Parliament this session. It was, of course, a very toxic session, because the closer you get to an election, the more the rhetoric gets torqued. I love being a parliamentarian. I love Parliament. I love our system of government. I wish, and I don't say this facetiously, I wish our system of government was widely understood, particularly when we go into an election. Because we are not a presidential system. This is not a vote between who will be Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, Tom Mulcair, Justin Trudeau, me, or Gilles Duceppe. Of course, Gilles Duceppe will never be Prime Minister because they only run candidates in Quebec. Theoretically, I could become Prime Minister because Green Party candidates are everywhere, in all ridings across Canada. But in a Westminster parliamentary democracy, where the fundamental principle is supremacy of Parliament, treating an election as though we live in the US is a bit of a mistake. And that's why having a minority parliament with Green MPs can deliver better government than any other result coming from this election. That's why it really matters to focus on the candidate in each riding and not act as, I've got voters in my own riding, this amazes me. He said, we love you, we voted for you last time, but this time we're worried we might have to vote strategically. So you're thinking you might need to vote for someone other than me to make sure a conservative doesn't win? Because if you vote for me, I mean, I'm not conservative, you understand? And what it really is they're thinking about this order of people running for prime minister as though we actually have any. If anyone tells you they're running for prime minister, or you hear any of the party leaders saying that, and I have heard party leaders say it in the past, it represents not just a benign, but a fairly monstrous misunderstanding of our system of government. We elect 300, and this time 338 MPs. In theory, all members of Parliament are equal, and the Prime Minister is merely first among equals. Most Prime Ministers in the history of Canada never thought it was a full-time job. Most Prime Ministers throughout our history, right up until Pierre Trudeau, most Prime Ministers were also something like Minister of Justice and Prime Minister, Minister of External Affairs and Prime Minister. It was never a central agency in charge of everything that goes on in Ottawa until Stephen Harper came along. But it has been growing, I'd say like a cancerous lesion on the body politic, ever since Pierre Trudeau invented it in 1970. Prior to 1970, and I know this because the principal secretary to Lester B. Pearson, who was minority Liberal government before in the late 60s, his principal secretary was a wonderful Canadian named Tom Kent, whom I came to know. And Tom Kent reported that the Prime Minister's office under Lester B. Pearson was a handful of file clerks and some stenographers. It was just the office to do a little bit of work the Prime Minister needed doing to keep things tidy, because the work of government was being done by the Minister of Justice, had a Department of Justice, and the Minister of Justice brought those ideas and issues to a cabinet table. All the ministers actually were responsible for their own portfolios. One of my favorite he was senator, he's retired now, Lowell Murray from Cape Breton, he was a progressive conservative. And as he retired from the Senate, he wrote in the Globe and Mail that currently cabinet ministers are quote-unquote mere ciphers. So my version of it is that to be a minister in Stephen Harper's cabinet is to be the chief public relations spokesperson for policies you don't understand and had nothing to do with creating. Because everything is dreamed up in PMO, and then the ministers are told what it is they're supposed to do. But it's not as if it's only Stephen Harper that's responsible for this. It started in 1970. Each prime minister, from Trudeau to Mulroney to Chrétien, there was a brief pause under Paul Martin where he worried about something called the democratic deficit, but Stephen Harper has taken it quite far. So it really matters to understand our system of government. It matters to ensure that Green MPs in a minority parliament are in a position to say to Tom Mulcair or potentially Justin Trudeau, what are you going to do to dismantle the unhealthy, anti-democratic levels of control that the Prime Minister's office has? Because I promise you it will not be the natural inclination of any of those people, either of them, or anybody in any of the other parties, to walk into the Prime Minister's office and express shock and horror that they have too much power. They'll like it. They'll think, I didn't like it when Harper was a dictator because he had bad ideas, but I have good ideas, so I should be a good dictator. We need to actually fix some fundamental structural problems in how Parliament is operating, because on a daily basis, the Prime Minister and his office display a contempt of Parliament daily, and that's unhealthy. Our former parliamentary budget officer, Kevin Page, pointed out that one of our fundamental principles, in addition to supremacy of Parliament, is that Parliament controls the public purse. You know what's missing in the last number of years' budgets? A budget. It's not in there. I think we should call it the annual spring thick brochure. It's full of taglines and announcements, but it does not include a statement of total government revenues, total government expenses, the budgets of any department year on year for comparison's sake. Doesn't show total revenues, total expenses, bottom line. To get that information, you have to look at the main estimates, and you also have to look at the supplementary estimates that often come up quite a long time later, and even then you're not sure. I asked the Parliamentary Budget Office once, and there's a good staff in there, at what point do we really know how the people's money is being spent? And they said, well, basically never, because you don't get an accounting that you can actually track. So again, fundamental parliamentary principles. The most fundamental of all, go back 800 years, our most fundamental principle is Magna Carta. The Right Honourable Joe Clark spoke in my riding at the invitation of the Green Party in January of this year. I was very, very honoured that he would and that he did, because he considers himself a political orphan. He wasn't taking up membership in the Green Party. But he spoke in Sydney and said that Stephen Harper is violating Magna Carta. There's some fundamental principles about how a king can't usurp power from the commoners. And Joe Clark isn't the first to make note of this. Ned Franks, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Queen's University, said at the time of the second prorogation that we should now refer to Stephen Harper as King Stephen I of Canada. Now, I hope you'll accept from me that this is not a rant against Stephen Harper. It is a statement of concern as a citizen that fundamentals of Canadian democracy are hanging by a thread. This election is when we need to fix that. And making that a harder proposition is the fact that this isn't the stuff of the daily press, and people don't think about it being a big deal that the Prime Minister's office is ordering people around in the Privy Council office or telling departments of government to alter their reports to make them happy pieces of news to run alongside statements that would otherwise be considered counterfactual. It's a very big challenge we face in this election to both inform, activate, mobilize Canadians to vote in larger numbers than we have in many years to get back the Canada we love, to get back essential parliamentary democracy. And of course, one of the key reasons that I am excited about Claire being a member of Parliament with me is that we are going to have to work immediately very hard to get the climate negotiations that take place opening on November 30th. We vote October 19th, and by November 30th, Claire and I hope Dr. Lynn Cornby from Burnaby North Seymour, and other strong, Gord Miller and I started talking about him running for the Green Party when he and I were both in Lima, Peru for the negotiations that took place last December. We need Canada to show up at the negotiations, not just with a change of Prime Minister, but with a fully a robust, expert team that's ready to actually move the rest of the world to the agreement that science dictates. So we have a big agenda. I've spoken too long already. We want to open it up to any questions you have about anything. I'll just close by saying that tomorrow, as of now, maybe, probably, Stephen Harper is going to drop the writ. The best information we can get as a federal political party, because Stephen Harper has not yet picked up the phone to bring me into the loop. Now, I should say sometimes we have actually had confidential conversations where he has picked up the phone or asked me to meet with him privately to discuss something sensitive. In this case, I have no idea, except that the media has been told at the national level, the major national TV networks have been told to assemble for tomorrow morning in various locations across Canada, including in my riding, where we'll have a launch. And the final confirmation of whether this is a go or not will be received at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning Eastern Time. So we're busy in southern Vancouver Island sending out alerts to volunteers and supporters to say, please, we think we're going to need you at 6:30 tomorrow morning. It's a Sunday, please. And I know it's a long weekend, but please, anyone who can come. But before you leave your house, you might want to check your email in case it's off. It's a pretty weird proposition, but we think the election is going to be called tomorrow. We think the voting date will still be October 19th. We know that will mean almost doubling the amount of money that can be legally spent in a writ period by political parties. Jean-Pierre Kingsley was interviewed this morning on CBC The House, our former chief electoral officer, saying that he regards this as illegitimate, as violating rules that they took years to develop. But essentially, what it essentially means is that each of the big political parties, well, we could too, we absolutely could. We are now legally allowed to spend $50 million this election. But as Jean-Pierre Kingsley pointed out, the only party that anyone knows of that actually has $50 million to spend in this election are the Conservatives. And half of that will be rebated to them after the election by the people of Canada. So we will have the torturous reality of having to listen and watch their attack ads while knowing that we're paying for half of them. So, welcome to election 2015. You're here at Ground Zero. You're here to ask any questions of my colleagues, Ken Melemed, Claire Martin, or me, and thank you for coming.
Yes. Elizabeth, hear what you just said to us. So many people would vote for you. I'm doing canvassing, and still at the door, people are saying, well, the Green Party is just an environmental party. I really, really hope that in this campaign, all of this stuff that you know can come out so people see how well-rounded you are.
Well, I have
the candidates.
Yeah, well, thank you. What was your name?
Nancy.
Nancy, I think. Look, Nancy's question, which wasn't a question, it was really lovely commentary and praise, was that if every Canadian could hear what I just said to you, they'd be much more likely to vote Green. They still labor under the apprehension when she knocks on the door canvassing that we're a one-issue party and we're only concerned with the environment. We've tried really hard. I mean, obviously, it's important to care about survival. But I'm increasingly telling people, yeah, okay, the Green Party, we will admit, we are increasingly a one-issue party, and our issue is democracy. Because it's hanging by a thread. So I don't know how to get the message out. I was hoping that the national televised leaders debates would be the best chance. I don't know if you all heard what's happening with the debates, but it's a schmozzle. The only debate as of now, this minute, that I know for sure is even going to happen in the English language, certainly the only one in which I have been included, where Stephen Harper has accepted and Tom Mulcair is still showing up, and Justin Trudeau will be there, is next week. Maclean's Magazine is hosting a debate in the City TV studios in Toronto, August 6th. That may be the only debate until October 19th. The National Broadcasters debate, CBC's debate, which is broadcast last election, 2011, 14 million people in English and in French watched those leaders' debates. I wasn't allowed into them, but that's another story. That's the reach it had, 14 million people. How many people, with all due respect to Maclean's, how many people are going to tune in August 6th to a debate that you can only get on some cable channels unless you happen to know about it and stream it on your computer? The national televised debates have been one of the key milestones, essential to every election campaign in this country since 1968.
And you know what's really funny? So I'm going to jump in here because this is what really drives me nuts about this. Remember that a debate, and this is me speaking now as a media person, these debates are not about those people that are taking part. They're about us, Canadians, hearing from those in Parliament. They actually don't have the right to say, I'm not taking part in this. You know, you don't have that right, Mr. Trudeau, or Mr. Harper, or Mr. Mulcair. You are being told that Canadians would like to hear you speak about issues that are incredibly important. You don't have the right to back out. And that's what drives me the most.
Well, guess what? So guess who? Okay, so you know the sequence, right? I got included in obviously, I have a wonderful letter from Stephen Harper that actually says that the Conservatives support the national televised debates, and the only rule is that you must have one seat in Parliament and then you're included. Of course, the letter was from 2007, but he seems to have changed his mind. We had a meeting about these debates between the Conservatives, the NDP, the Liberals, the Greens, the Bloc, and all the big networks. And at that meeting, Mr. Harper's spokesperson, Corey Tenake, who used to be the head of Sun Media, anyway, he said, well, he was in a bit of a huff, and he kind of stopped out and said, we'll tell you later how we feel about what you're proposing. Because the consortium was proposing broadcasters 2 debates in English and 2 debates in French. So that would have been much better content and information for voters. Then the Conservatives announced that they did not plan, that they were not participating. No one said you don't have the right. They actually kind of covered for them because Tenag said, oh, we're not going to do those debates. We're going to do more debates, and they're going to be different. And then he said, these broadcasters, the CBC, it's a cabal. So we next met again with the broadcasters, but this time it was the NDP, the Liberals, Greens, and the Bloc, and the major national broadcasters. And they said, well, what are we going to do? And we all agreed. I wasn't the one in the room, but my chief of staff and the director of communications of the Green Party said, well, we're agreed. We're going to stick together. We'll go ahead with the national televised debates. We'll leave an empty podium for Stephen Harper, and he'll show up. Because he's not about to leave an empty podium and give four party leaders the chance to keep speaking to it and pointing out what it did wrong, since it isn't there to defend it. So we were feeling, I was disheartened that Harper was rejecting the major national debates. I knew they wouldn't be as effective with just the four opposition party leaders debating among ourselves. But then yesterday, Thomas Mulcair said, not going to go. So, I mean, the idea that we were going to hold together to hold his feet to the fire, if you're going to wait, if you're going to do that and you actually ever cared about getting Harper into those debates, you wait till October 5th. You don't do it July 31st. We didn't have the opportunity. No, I'm hoping Thomas Mulcair will change his mind, because this lets Canada down. Canadians, as Claire said, these debates are not about the politicians. They're about Canadians having access, for once, unfiltered by the spin doctors that write the scripts. I mean, it is true that the debates feel pretty scripted, except for me, but there's still an opportunity to put questions to party leaders, to allow them to interchange with each other. And the rest of the election campaign is highly controlled events, trying to profile each of the leaders to maximum benefit, as well as horrific, gosh, I don't know what we're going to see next in attack ads, but I don't think they'll be pretty. And we're going to get a lot of them because of this increase in the spending limits. So the debate situation right now is pretty grim. So my chances of making clear from coast to coast to coast of what the Green Party stands for, what policies we're advocating, how our policies would allow for Canadian governments to work more collaboratively. We're calling for a Council of Canadian Governments that would be the federal government, provincial and territorial, with representation from local and municipal government, as well as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples at the same table, meeting regularly with a transparent, published agenda, not making laws or regulations because they wouldn't have that power, but setting national goals and national targets so we could achieve policy alignment, so the money spent locally would be pulling in the same direction as the money, tax dollars spent provincially is the same direction as the money spent federally. Imagine if we were all pulling in the same direction, how much more effective. For instance, we don't have a national housing strategy, but we need one. And this is an area where it's perfect. We have a crisis of housing in First Nations communities, but there isn't a community in Canada that doesn't have a housing problem. We need federal, provincial, local, First Nations, Métis, and we can pull together and have the same goal and then all work towards it. So the kinds of things that I want to talk about in a debate aren't just to say, I should be Prime Minister so we can implement these things. It's to say, these are good ideas. We need whoever forms government in a minority parliament to work together to bring these changes in. Where we need a national foreigner care plan. There are a lot of things that Greens are going to be advocating, and keeping me marginalized from out of all the debates now except for one is pretty grim news on the eve of an election. And I've been completely blocked out of all French debates, because the only French debate I was going to be in is Radio Canada, and La Presse was going to coordinate with Radio Canada. But now that Tom Mulcair says he doesn't want to go in any debate that Harper's not in, that would mean, I don't know if that debate would happen with Radio Canada and La Presse. TVA, the commercial network for Quebec, is going with its own debate, and Harper and Trudeau, Mulcair, and Duceppe have all agreed to appear in the TVA debate. TVA is keeping the Greens out. They say there's nothing the Greens are talking about that interests Quebecers. Now, you can't claim it's the number of seats, right? Because the Bloc has 2 seats, the Greens have 2 seats. This is, I was quoted in the Globe and Mail today, I just opened it and saw it just moments ago. That this stinks to high heaven? Yeah, this stinks to high heaven. Yeah.
I was wondering what you were doing about the young vote. I have a grandson, 19, whose father is actually kind of rich, he announced to me the other day, incredibly sad, that he was actually very interested in the Green Party, much to his father's dismay.
You've done something good. That's all.
I mean, I wondered how much you could influence the people of his age, because he actually looked quite excited.
Well, I'm so committed to youth voter turnout, and being the oldest of the party leaders, representing the riding in Canada that has the oldest demographic in the country, I still think somehow we have to find a way that reaches young people. They are not apathetic, they are not disinterested, they are disgusted.
Exactly.
And the reason they get excited about the Green Party is that we're seriously listening to them, and we're working for their future, and they can see the difference.
So we're actually, especially in this riding, and I know Ken's doing the same as West. Sorry, we're actually actively going after what I call the youth vote, which I think the top is about 30. We've decided age 30. And we're engaging them on their playing field. So right now I've got Periscope and Twitter going. Once we get to the debate that Elizabeth is on, we are actually getting the youth in here, and we're going to live tweet through the debates.
Oh, cool.
So we're playing bingo debate. And that's how they talk to us now.
Do you know what my son said to his son about the Green? He said they're just disaffected conservatives.
Oh, really?
Well, let me just say about the youth vote too while we're at it. There's also a youth wing to the Green Party called Young Greens. They come up with their own campaigns. They have their own separate funding. They're doing campus-based work across the country. We're doing a lot on how to register and how to vote, and we need this message to get out to people soon. Because of the Unfair Elections Act, it's going to be much harder for people to vote in a number of different categories, including some of us who are older. Anyone who's given up a driver's license will find it much harder to vote, and they won't be expecting it necessarily. Basically everybody should try to find someone who didn't vote in the last election. Make it a buddy system, a personal responsibility to get that person, regardless of age. Some will be young, some will be your neighbor, you'll be really surprised they didn't vote. Drag them down to an advanced poll. You don't even have to find out how they plan to vote. Because in the last election, the largest voting bloc in this country is the people who didn't vote. 40% of Canadians who stayed home represented more votes than every Conservative vote that was cast. They could have formed majority government, the We Stay Home Party. So we need to reach, and it's not just young people, it's a lot of people. And as far as the Greens, it is true there are a lot of former Conservatives who've joined the Green Party because our policies are very pragmatic. And if you're a former progressive Conservative, you don't have a home. And a lot of former reformers who actually believed in Preston Manning's principles that you shouldn't have a dictator who replaces candidates that have been chosen at the local level. So we attract people, and I welcome them. But we're the most socially progressive party in the country because we're the only party advocating guaranteed livable income to eliminate poverty. And we're the only party in the country that has a serious climate plan. So we don't quite fit in the different cubby holes of left, right, center, because we're different from all that. So I appreciate your son and I appreciate your grandson's perspective. You'll have to correct your son on the disaffected conservative thing.
Yeah. And for your grandson, and I'm finding this as well with a lot of, I'm now going to bring back Cat Low, I say up to about 19. We not only are engaging them really well, but we land in the same sort of ideology as they do, because most of them have been brought up knowing about ozone depletion, climate change. So on that level, which is our backbone, they're already green. In fact, they're the ones that nag us, saying, really, could you turn the tap on? So in so many ways, the youth vote is already green. We just need to bring them in as voters and start to feel engaged and feel like they actually have a voice. That's one thing that I'm hearing over and again. Oh, you don't need my voice. It's like, hell no, we need you more than anything.
I think, by the way, one little trivia thing, I'll have to double check because there might be one other candidate that fits this across the country for another. I think we're going to have the youngest candidate in Canada because one of our candidates in Quebec turns 18 October 19th. Anyway, you have a question, you've been standing for a bit.
I wanted to say, you said something about April 21st,
Yes, the day the budget came down
and the next day was April 22nd, or?
was Earth Day.
Yeah, Earth Day.
Yes, and it was, as I read through the budget, as I do, in budget lockup. Budget lockup is an interesting experience where they literally lock us up and you get to read the budget. In the old days, you know, these are small things to bemoan, but in the old days, they'd serve coffee, but not the conservatives. They lock you up and you can read the budget, but you can't leave the room. They'll bring an escort around if you need to use the ladies. But anyway, get through reading the budget. Sometimes I read through everything really fast looking for things. I found one thing in it that I actually asked Joe Oliver to do, which was to reinstate some advertising for Canada as a tourist destination in the U.S. Can you believe for the last number of years, if you saw a big, beautiful picture of wilderness on a billboard in the United States, of Canadian wilderness, paid for by the people of Canada, it could be there for only one reason, and that was to advertise the Keystone Pipeline. Because they put to zero the budget for advertising Canada as a tourist destination in the U.S., which is our biggest market. So anyway, I convinced Joe Oliver that with an 80-cent dollar, the sector that could grow the fastest, turn on a dime, expand the staff, would be tourism, and we needed to invest in telling the U.S. market about our low dollar, because they don't always follow the value of the Canadian dollar the way we do. So anyway, that was the budget. But I went through the whole budget, and then I went through it twice, and I went through it 3 times to find if climate was mentioned anywhere. Not mentioned anywhere. And then I thought, it's hard when you think about things that are missing. You pay attention to what you see and you get upset about it. But I went back and I looked again. Where's our overseas development assistance budget? Not mentioned. Not anywhere in the budget. It's a very strange thing. So the budget was April 21st, and you're right, Earth Day was the very next day. And nothing on climate in the 2015 budget. There was another hand right there, yes.
When we did the town hall meeting, or the meet and greet at our house with young people, one of the young fellows said that they feel like their vote doesn't count because none of the advertising is ever geared towards young people. It's families, it's businesses, small businesses, but it's never towards young people.
And that's because there's a cynicism around this. We've put a lot of effort in organizing on university campuses. And I've actually had people in other parties who are friendly with me, that they actually say, as if they're giving me a good tip, why do you bother? You know, young people don't vote. So it's self-reinforcing. Why are there no advertisements that are geared to why young people should vote? Because the other parties have concluded young people don't vote. So the policies that are developed, I mean, this mania of all the other parties tripping over each other to claim the middle class. But the middle class, a strong, stable, prosperous middle class, is the foundation of any healthy democracy. But what happened to worrying about the poor? What happened to being concerned that youth unemployment is double the national average? There are a lot. And what about the crushing student debts? I mean, they get out of here. So there's also a really good group that Paul Kershaw from UBC has been creating called Gen Squeeze. If you want to have a look at some really serious and good stats on how much harder it is to get your start in life in 2015 leaving university than in 1975 leaving university, the price of housing, I mean, the whole thing is, so one of the reasons there aren't good policies aimed at young people is that the other parties have decided young people don't vote, so they're not a market that they are trying to appease. It's awful, but there's a certain amount of cynicism to it.
So if the youth did vote, they wouldn't normally be voting for them. The youth are going to vote for the Green Party.
Well, quite a few of the kids that were there are going to vote for the
It was actually quite funny. If anybody wants to hold a mingler, by the way, I'll come out. We did a youth mingler last week, gave them beer and pizza and a voter registration card. And the deal was, you get the beer, you get the pizza, but promise me you're going to register to vote. And they all did. So that's
good.
That's the way to do it. There was a hand in the back somewhere. Yes.
What are the prospects of proportional representation, and is there a chance of that ever happening?
I think there's an excellent chance in this next parliament. The nice thing about proportion, everybody here knows about proportional representation and what's wrong with first past the post, right? I mean, first past the post, one of the things that make them, I mean, I've always been against first past the post since I understood the benefits of proportional representation in terms of every vote counting. But the longer I've been in politics, the more I realize that the nastiness and the unwillingness to work across party lines is reinforced by a voting system where you might lose some of your own base by saying anything decent or respectful or courteous about another party leader. So really, it's a vicious part of our culture. So why would we change it this time? Tom Mulcair has pledged to bring in mixed member proportional. Justin Trudeau has said that if he were able to form government, 2015 would be the last election under first past the post. Although there's a bit of fuzziness about what the Liberals would bring in instead. It might be more like preferential voting than real proportional representation. But with enough Green MPs elected that we have, and this is totally possible, that Green MPs could be in the position of holding a balance of power in a minority parliament. My colleagues in the Green Party of Australia, election before last, had the balance of power in a minority parliament. And that was with one seat. You never know how the math is going to go. I obviously want to expect and know we'll have a whole lot more than one seat. But with if we're in a position to negotiate with Tom Mulcair or Justin Trudeau about taking a precarious 2-year minority mandate and making it a 4-year mandate, and I'll be even clearer about this since there's a member of the media in the room, I don't think we want to go to coalition government myself. I support coalition governments, they're legitimate, there's nothing wrong with them, but I have so many colleagues in Green parties around the world whom I've gotten to know, and the real life experience of Greens in somebody else's government isn't always a happy one, and your only option if you disagree with something that government is doing is to leave that cabinet and wrench that government. And I think we will be more effective in a minority parliament where we play the same role that the NDP played in the Liberal minority government of Lester B. Pearson, where we are still opposition members, we sit across the aisle, we hold them to account, but on a couple key issues, they will do what's required for Canada, and we'll have their back only on confidence votes. Now that kind of agreement and cooperation has as its basis 2 things: climate and proportional representation. Yes, sir.
How much do you think party funding is linked to changing proportional representation?
How much is which?
Party funding.
Oh, party funding.
In other words, big businesses funding the Conservative Party, unions and funding NDP. They must fund them for a reason. There's a sort of
And you think it's connected to proportional voting?
well, they're going against proportional representation.
Okay, see, all right, now first of all, one of the best and the only remaining vestiges of good politics left in Canadian law around elections really is our financing laws, because at the federal level, now BC is the Wild West of no party funding rules at all. A political party provincially can take money from people out of the country, can take money from corporations. At the federal level, no federal party can take money from anyone other than an individual Canadian, and there are funding limits. The donation can be as much as $1,500 federally and $1,500 locally. So the maximum individual contribution comes to $3,000. Now I've heard there's ways they game it. I've heard that some, and I can't cite it chapter and verse, but there's nothing that, well, it isn't legal to do it, but if you were to say to have a large corporation where all your executives got a healthy bonus, and they understood that part of that bonus was to go to a political party, there's ways that people skirt it, but honestly, big unions can't fund the NDP anymore. Big business can't fund the Liberals and the Conservatives anymore. Individual Canadians write those checks. And that's a really good thing. I mean, getting rid of the per vote subsidy, which Harper did, was a terrible thing, because that was the one public funding mechanism that was driven by the way someone voted. So it was democratic. As I mentioned, they still have massive amounts of public funds go to political parties, but as the example of during an election, during a writ period, at least half the money comes back to the large parties. And in the case of I should mention this in case you want to give a donation to Claire's campaign, the tax benefits are generous, much more generous to a political party than if you feel like giving to Oxfam or CARE or Red Cross. I mean, political parties at its sort of the sweet spot of a $400 donation has a 75% return. So you end up paying $100 in real money to give $400 to a political party. But the parties, I mean, it's clear that parties are somewhat driven by their funding base, but I think it's hard to track exactly how all that happens. I think a lot of it happens after politics with what boards you get appointed to. It happens with, and it's also about a paradigm shift in the role of government and the relationship between a sovereign nation, its citizenry, and business. And over a period of time, we've shifted to, and in most parties, an implicit assumption that government works for corporations while pretending to work for citizens.
That was...
And that's, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something on the proportional representation, and this speaks to one of the reasons why, well, I don't know about Elizabeth, but Claire potentially, but I know for me, it's all about proportional representation. And to get it, the best opportunity Canada has is to elect more Greens.
Yeah.
So it's all nice that the other parties, the Liberals and the NDP, have committed to proportional representation in some form or other. You know, I read something interesting the other day on the NDP site. They claim, oh yeah, this has been in our policy books for years. We've been in favor of proportional representation. When was the last provincial NDP government anybody heard of that brought in proportional representation?
Well, they fought it in BC.
Yeah, they fought it. And actually the guy that took it down, claims to take credit for it, Bill Thielman, he wrote an op-ed piece, and I had the pleasure of reading that. And he explained why the NDP says one thing and does another. It's because the only benefit for proportional representation is to the Green Party, and why in heck would we want to give them any more seats? So you have to read between the lines and get all the information, and I think the parties are both saying that they're in favor of proportional representation because it's timely and Fair Vote Canada has been active and it sounds democratic. But the reality is, if we all want to get that done, electing more Greens is the way to hold their feet to the fire and make it a reality.
Claire, what are you saying to your constituents, your voters? You say, I'm going to vote strategically this election. You may have my vote, you may not, depending on how the...
You know, it's the number one thing, I don't know if you heard Kathy say, what are we saying to people who are on the doors when we go door knocking, say, I've got to think about this strategically, because in essence it feels like we all have a common goal, said out loud or not, and there's some people who think there's a way to do it strategically and there's other people that don't. And my answer to that is, my mantra this year is be an informed voter. So make sure you know some of the key issues that are going on out there. C-51 is a massive issue. The climate, which funnily enough I've sort of not really harped on as much as I should do, but look at where we live. My God, people, that's one of our key issues. So be an informed voter. Promise me your vote. I really, really want to see a much larger turnout in North Vancouver, but across Canada. And then when you've voted, feel good about your vote. And knowing those three things, I guarantee you won't vote strategically. The way to vote strategically is to vote for what you want. That's your strategy. Not to vote for what you, like a lesser of two evils. That's a stupid strategy. So, you know, be informed, to own your vote, be empowered by your vote.
Or the evil of two lessers.
Or the evil of two lessers. Thinking about it. So, it's the number one thing I'm hearing, and it's the number one thing that I'm trying to hammer out, and I'm constantly out there saying it. So, be informed, vote, feel good about your vote. And invariably you're going to vote for it.
I want to comment too, but US can, so you go.
Yes.
I wonder it all from
I'll chip in. You know, we're trying everything. And I'm at a certain point, I'm saying, you know what, we don't have time to focus on the strategic voters, because the reality is that I don't know if they have ever successfully changed the outcome of an election. We don't know that for a fact. That's their assumption. Seems logical. But I'm saying to many of them, you know what, that's fine. everybody has their own right to make their own choice in the ballot box. We're going to win with or without you. And we do it, as Elizabeth said, by increasing the voter turnout, getting the people who believe in the future and want to vote from hope and good sound, vote their values and their principles rather than, picking between malaria and plague.
I tell you, having lived through it and won an election, when I announced that I was running in Sandwich Gulf Islands in 2009, actually, some of my very best friends were not just, they didn't just disagree, they were violently angry with me that I was doing a bad and horrible thing. That because I was running in Sandwich Gulf Islands, I was guaranteeing that Conservative Cabinet Minister Gary Lund would be re-elected. Because it was so obvious that I would only split the vote. Right? They looked at election results from 2008. So well, look, 2008, the Green candidate only got 10% of the vote. The Liberals nearly won in 2008. Gary Lund got in by a narrow margin. So if you run now, you're just splitting the vote. You should get behind the Liberal candidate so Gary Lund can be defeated. And I had the hardest time trying to explain that, well, the situation then was different. I've got a really good chance. I had friends who, right up until after I won, when they were delighted, didn't believe that I was doing anything other than not just a bad idea, but as if I'd become a bad person. That I was actually believed, so it's a radical concept to believe that in an election, democracy might happen. And that, that no party actually owns votes. And between election to election, particularly Canadians are going to look at what's on offer, and particularly if they look at the strength of the individual candidates and decide to vote for what they want. In Sandwich Gulf Islands, the Greens went from 10% in 2008 to 46% in 2011. I got 7,000 more votes than Gary Lund. Defeating a city cabinet minister wasn't something that a Green Party candidate was supposed to be able to do. And Andrew Weaver did the same. By the way, we had the highest voter turnout in Canada, except for PEI, in my riding. We had 75% voter turnout. So we're saying bring up the vote. We're serious. By the way,
tell them about PEI.
PEI is right. So we had the same thing happen with Andrew Weaver in Oakville, Gordon Head, David Kuhn in Fredericton. These are also examples of high voter turnout and Greens defeating sitting cabinet ministers. The most recent time it happened was in early May in Prince Edward Island, where the Green Party candidate, Peter Bevan Baker, went from 8% of the vote in the previous election to winning. He got 55% of the popular vote, but the voter turnout in his riding was 90%. So we got a ways to go. We start actually getting people to vote. Imagine if democracy happened. It'd be very exciting. We'd form government.